Here you have these. If you've watched any of the news right now, it's just like you have these thousands of refugees trying to do a simple thing: get someplace where they can live a quiet, orderly life. That's a simple thing, and they can't make it. And here we are in the American bubble, worried about whether we're going to be able to buy enough Christmas presents because they're all on the boats out on the. And we probably have more stuff that we can buy for Christmas than in stores and all the rest of the world put together. So anyway, there's a bunch of inequities, the oppression of the poor, the denial of justice. That's a big one in chapter 5. And so usually we have to go outside America. We have some inequities in America, that's for sure. But about which we can do little. That's the frustrating part. Like, I'd like to help those people over there, but how can I? So I try to pick something we actually can do in the world, and the Bible has a lot to say about orphans. So Eileen and I have been on this track for a long time of different orphans through the Indian Gospel League, and we put their pictures on our refrigerator. And when I stop at the refrigerator door, I usually put my hand on their picture and pray for them. And I say, God, I have no idea what you're going to do in this kid's life, but we're trusting you for what you're going to do. And since I've been to India and I've seen those kids, I've been awakened by those kids at 5 a.m. 5 a.m., they're in a big pavilion out here in semi-darkness, singing Christian songs. And when I say 500 of them at one time, at this one compound, hundreds of them in other orphanage compounds, getting up 5 a.m., praising God, learning the Bible, getting a real education, having health care. And the Bible says so much about orphans. So I want to add an addendum to what Ray said this morning. I think in America, when we think about having compassion for our neighbor, we don't look beyond the borders of America usually, or beyond the borders of Portage County. We don't look far enough. God's thinking of the whole world. He's not just thinking of Portage County and our limited sphere of what we can see. When he says, help the widows and orphans, he means worldwide. Millions of them. There are millions of widows and orphans out there. So I think, we need to get on a track where we actually can do something about that kind of affair. And then number 4, it's affairs which may seem simple in themselves are most likely to be met with deep frustration than success. So you can read that on your own. There's 2 verses here, though, I want to highlight. You might want to write them under the others. They're still there. But 7:20 and 7:29, as Ray was speaking this morning, I was thinking how this applied. In 7:20, what he says is basically Romans 3:23. Everyone's a sinner. And his big point is we have to come to grips with that as human beings. We just have to say to ourselves, I am a miserable, wretched sinner. Why in the world would God want to have mercy on me? And why in the world has he already done it and continues to do so? I have no clue. And then 7:29 is a really one. What it basically says is, left to ourselves as human beings, we will seek out sin. We won't seek out good. Just left to ourselves as sinners, we will look for sin to do. We will seek it out. That's 7:20 and 7:29. So that's looking at life negatively, which a lot of people get lost in Ecclesiastes. I've never understood that. I understand Eileen, but she and I have had this ongoing conversation about Koheleth and Ecclesiastes. She's like, man, I can only read so much of that. It's so, you got to read the other parts, but that's not, Eileen's in good company, because about 9/10 of the people that read Ecclesiastes go, oh my gosh, this book is a downer. No, it's not. It's an upper. You gotta read what what he says about the downer parts. So, negatively, positively, on page 10. Life is useful and significant because it's an opportunity for learning of an eternal sort. Remember, it gives us perspective on life. perspective. And so you can look those passages up. The key one are 9:1 and 12:1 through 7. But he talks, a couple of things he talks about in those passages are crooked rulers and politicians, which is kind of interesting. And here's a little side thought you can think about. Unlike Ray, I do like going on rabbit trails. Although I do note that Ray picked up my phrase that I used for years. By the way, people used to come to me and say, "Oh, we got 3 by the ways this morning." By the way, I have a lot of friends who've been in missions all over the world all their lives, and like me, they're retired. One of my best friends in seminary, Dave Southwell, went to Brazil first. Then he went to Portugal and started the whole ministry in Portugal. But in Brazil, I remember getting early letters from him, and that was back before cell phones, way before cell phones. And phone calls. Actually, would get a phone call. But to get a church built in Brazil, you had to bribe the politicians. He said, now my American churches have trouble with this, but he said, if I didn't bribe the politicians, we'd never have a church in Brazil anywhere. It just wouldn't happen. You got to bribe the people that control the permits and the people that control stuff to get a church built. It just is the way life is. It's simple. And so Solomon has some stuff to say about that kind of thing in that regard. Not only is it an opportunity for learning, but it's an experience of blessing if we appropriate the right stuff. And all the passages are there. But the big point is we have choices. And we can have choices and enjoy our church choices, but not without God. To enjoy life without God is totally meaningless, he says repetitively. But with God, under the sun, S-O-N, we can enjoy our choices, enjoy our life, but not without God, with God. So it's a time of preparation, number 3, if one sees the end. Now, I do want to go to these passages. They're 2 of my most favorite passages in all the book. 7, 2-4, which I think American Christianity is totally missing in terms of perspective. We read these before and made a couple comments on them, but to me they're some of the most important words in the whole book. 7:2-4. It is better to go to a house of mourning, or funeral, than to go to a house of feasting, because that, the funeral, is the end of every man, and the living takes it to heart. You know, you need to think about where life is inevitably going. That's the whole point of Ecclesiastes. I had a good friend. I have a good friend in the ministry. He said his little quote was, or his little quip was, that death is the ultimate reality of life. We're dealing with the ultimate reality of life, death. Sorrow is better than laughter, for when a face is sad, a heart may be happy. The mind of the wise is in the house of mourning, while the mind of fools is in the house of pleasure. May I present to you that in America we are inundated with fools who constantly tell us via the media that life is all about the pleasure we can enjoy, no matter what form it takes. And so that's just incorrect, is what Solomon says. That's just wrong thinking, wrong biblical thinking. What we need to think about, and we don't mean to be morbid about it or be all consumed with it, but we have to have it as a something we know and we understand and we know what we should be doing because of it. And then it's an opportunity of service. Biggest chapter 12. Remember your Creator in your youth, meaning anytime you're younger, before all that bad stuff starts to happen to you in the poem of old age. Your molars are few, your grinders are few, you can't see out, the windows dim. You know, you're afraid of climbing a ladder, fear of heights, all that stuff that we talked about there in the poem of old age. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I have no idea where we are with time. I could have.
15.
Really?
7:47.
Okay, so I'm lost again on time. It's beyond my pay grade. So
18 minutes.
let's stop here and think for a second or two. You guys have any thoughts or observations or questions or analysis about anything in Ecclesiastes? I want to encourage you to spend some time with your syllabus. Have fun with Ecclesiastes. I have fun with this book. I like to go there and start reading. It's a fun book. I'm looking forward to talking to Koheleth in person someday. He'll be like Jerry Larson. The one thing I do see here, that's another thread that runs through this book, is being the king weighed heavily on him. When he talks about oppression and injustice and the inequities of life, I can see that as a ruler he wanted, and that's what he asked God for. He asked God for wisdom to rule the nation of Israel well. And I can see that it really bothers him when he's unable to do that, when there are things beyond his control that he can't fix as a political ruler. That's another little thread that runs through the book that, you want to jot it down on paper and follow it through and see what he says. Okay, I'll stop talking. But have fun with the book. It's a fun book. It really is. And it's enjoyable, and we'll learn something. Okay, I'm going to stop. You guys have any thoughts, observations, whatever? It's Don.
I have a question. This goes against so many people's thinking, this idea you mentioned it before, about taking children to a memorial, a funeral service. Because they say it's so depressing, it's so...
Their thinking is all wrong. I'll be willing to tell them. I will. I do it every chance I get. Your thinking is all wrong. Sorry about that. I hope you're not the person that's thinking that way, but okay. Oh, it's just wrong thinking. Okay, let me tell you a story. Yeah, I'll get you there. Okay, I told you already about, you could see the church from our house, and I could see people out there digging graves. And every time someone died in our community, everybody went to the funeral. I don't know how many funerals I was to before I was 12 years old. Lots of them. But our neighbor down the road, I didn't hear the story till later. And I told my brother this the other day. The brothers for a visit. I said, Eileen makes fun of me. I have this electric blanket at home that I put on me.
It's not a blanket.
I call it, it's a banky. It's a throw. Yeah, and I sit there and watch TV. I put this thing on. And I harassed Bill Rue. I told him after I got my hip operation, I said, I get cold all the time. And I said, I have this theory because your body has to heat up all this metal in there all the time. And he said, oh, that's dumb. I said, Bill, have you ever gone outside in the winter and sat on a piece of steel? Of course not. I said, well, I have. I've been in places working where you sat down on a cold piece of steel. Well, it just sucks the life right out of you right now. So anyway, every house I went to as a kid had an old person sitting in a rocking chair over by the stove where it was warm. Every house. Every house I went to with my grandfather had one of those. Sometimes it was a woman, sometimes it was a man. Nursing homes were unheard of. No one ever heard of a nursing home. But our neighbor down the road, his name was Chris Bolliard, and I found out later he was the one instrumental for getting my grandfather his farm. And I remember my grandfather and grandmother talking at the supper table, and my granddad saying to my grandmother, Chris was living with one of his relatives, Aubrey Wolf, and he said, Aubrey said Chris is not going to make it much past today, so I think I better go down and see him tonight. And my granddad always asked me the same question whenever he went someplace. You want to go with me, Barry? Oh, yeah, I'll go anywhere. And so I remember us going down to that house. You went in the kitchen, straight in through to the kitchen, to the back. There's 3 steps up to a back bedroom. And we went in there, and here was this old man laying in a bed about ready to die. And we're standing there, and I don't remember any of the words of the conversation between my grandfather and him. But I remember at some point, it's the only time my grandfather, he reached down and took my hand, and all of a sudden I got the sense You know, people dying on this planet is really important. People dying